Okay, so let's talk a little bit about shadow and light. First off, let's do the first thing that we did, which is we're going to bring that black and white layer in just to see how Al looks with that sense of color there. So I think if we click here, let's get rid of the Al copy and just use that one. Click on Al down there. All right, so let's go in and let's just work using our we used levels again to kind of sense this. So what we want to do is we want to make the this kind of connect with this. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to bring kind of the lightest parts and make those a little bit hotter. And that's because we've got this thing here called a histogram. And the histogram is basically showing you how much of a concentration there are of different items. These are our shadows, these are our highlights, and this is our midtones. So if I bring my midtones, that's going to kind of bring everything kind of in the center area up. If I bring this over, you can see that there's not much in the highlights, so I can kind of bring that over there. And then a little bit more in the shadows. And we're going to just kind of use this to kind of get a sense of how Al should look. Once again, we're using this as a adjustment layer, so we don't like it, we can always turn it off. Let's turn off our black and white. Okay, so I think the contrast on that's a little bit hard. Let's bring that over just a little bit there. And now if we look, I think that looks a little bit better than that. Oops. Accidentally turned on the grid. All right, so we've got that level done. Next thing, let's talk about actually working with shadow. All right, so with shadow here, there's a couple of different options. The first is destructive. So if I were to go down to my foreground here, I can use something called the burn and dodge tool. This is from old time like darkroom photography. You would actually dodge something to lighten it because there would be less exposure, or burn something by basically increasing the light's exposure to the film when it was being developed. Dodge cools, dodge actually lightens, and burn will actually darken. So we want to darken, so we're going to use the burn tool. Go here in the foreground. I have to unlock this so I can use this. Now this is destructive. This is the problem. I can go through and this will give me a really nice dark shadow. Underneath. But the problem is if I suddenly decide that I want to move Al, and we should link these, actually I'll just select both of these, Command G to group them. Al. If I move Al, chunk, the shadow doesn't go, and the shadow is there. It's burnt. I can't undo it. I can try to lighten it, but it's not going to work. Let's undo. Now we can hit Command Z multiple times, but I want to introduce something else, which is the undo palette. If we click on that little icon here, you can see there's everything that I've done for the last 100 tries. So I want to just go up to the area before the burn tool. Now that does mean that I undid the grouping of these two, so I'll do that right now. Shift both of these, lock them, and Command G to group them. All right, let's do some other things. Get rid of that history there. So there are a couple other options that we can do. We can do what I like to call the kind of cartoony option. So I just am selecting all of this, and then I'm going to create a new layer by clicking here. That new layer is hit. We still have this. Now, when we have the marching ants, that's going to be the selection. We can't paint outside of that. So if I use my paintbrush with black, I'm going to make the item a lot bigger here. I can just kind of fill this in. We've got kind of this black kind of cartoony layer here, and then I can use my free transform Command T, and then distort. I can actually make this kind of look like a little shadow there. And then I just bring it underneath. So that's kind of a weird cartoony look. I'm going to get rid of that. The other thing we can do is we can just literally, underneath Al, create a new layer. Call that shadow. And then I can do what I just did before, but more freehand. And just paint it in. So, here. And I am going to make sure that I have a very soft brush. We can also change the softness of a brush by holding down, instead of with when we're using the layer tool here, when we're using the brush tool, we can use those brackets. If we hold down Shift, what that actually does is that increases or decreases the hardness of the brush. All right. So I'm just going to paint this in. Let's actually bring the opacity down a little bit lower so I can kind of do this over time. All right. And the other thing we want to do with this is the area where the shadows contact, we're going to darken that up. So we'll bring the opacity up even higher here, and then just really, the opacity up, not down, and then just really give like a nice kind of hard shadow right under there. Now you can see that this is affecting my grass, so we'll talk about how to fix that in just a second. But if we look here, aside from that, this gives us a nice kind of sense of light. And if we look how the light's working, you can see that it's kind of coming down. It's kind of bringing the shadows kind of right underneath it. You can kind of see. And the shadows here, it looks like that they're falling just a little bit over here. So we might have a little bit of shadow over there as we're looking. Bring the opacity down a little bit. Just a little bit of overlap there. All right. Because we have a little bit of light coming from that. All right, so we'll bring the shadow into there. Let's go back and fix this grass. So I'm going to get rid of the mask that I did there. And what's really cool is I can select an entire group and add a mask to that. Bring my brush hardness up very high, and then once again shrink down my there. And now selected, making sure I've got my opacity up very high. I can now mask out not only that, but also the shadow underneath. So, same thing in there. We might not want to do that. But here in the front, kind of give it a sense. The grass coming up, and then we can do our masking on Al in the background with the darker ones that are in shadow. All right. So there's that. You can kind of see how it looks without the shadow and without, whoops, without the mask we kind of looked at before. All right, so that's adding to it. We're getting pretty close to being done here. Let's do one last thing, which is try to go in and make the lighting on this look a little bit better.